What if I told you that one of the most revealing stories in the entire NFL right now has nothing to do with a trade, nothing to do with a free agency signing, and nothing to do with a blockbuster contract extension? What if I told you that the most telling story unfolding in professional football right now is happening in Cleveland, Ohio, and it centers on a young quarterback who spent his entire rookie season being quietly undermined by the very man who was supposed to be building him up? Because that is exactly what is happening. And thanks to the NFL Combine, the curtain has been pulled all the way back. The receipts are out. The contrast has been laid bare for every football fan, every analyst, and every scout in the country to see. We are talking about Shedeur Sanders. We are talking about the Cleveland Browns, and we are talking about the staggering, almost unbelievable difference between how two head coaches, Kevin Stefanski and Todd Monken, have treated this young man. When you hear it broken down piece by piece, when you really sit with the comparison and let it sink in, it is going to change the way you look at everything that happened in Cleveland last season. So lock in, because we are going deep on this one. Let us start at the beginning, because context is not just important here. Context is everything. When Shedeur Sanders was drafted by the Cleveland Browns, the football world had opinions, loud ones. Some people thought he was a steal. Some people thought Cleveland was the wrong fit. Some people questioned whether his college production at Colorado would translate to the NFL level. But what almost nobody predicted, what almost nobody could have anticipated, was that the single biggest obstacle standing between Shedeur Sanders and his development as a professional quarterback would not be an opposing defense. It would not be the learning curve of a complex NFL playbook. It would not even be the weight of expectations that comes with being one of the most talked about prospects in recent draft history. The biggest obstacle would be his own head coach. That sounds harsh. It sounds like an exaggeration. But here's the thing about statements that sound harsh. Sometimes they are just accurate. And this one is accurate. Kevin Stefanski, the man who was paid to develop Shedeur Sanders, the man whose job it was to create an environment where this young quarterback could grow, thrive, and reach his potential, could barely bring himself to say the kid's name in public. And before you dismiss that as tabloid noise or fan frustration clouding objective judgment, understand that this is not based on feelings. This is based on documented, recorded, on-camera evidence that anyone with an internet connection can go back and watch for themselves. When reporters asked Stefanski about Shedeur directly, specifically by name, the head coach of the Cleveland Browns responded the way a politician responds when someone asks about an investigation they're hoping will quietly disappear. He talked in circles. He used language so carefully constructed and so deliberately vague that it communicated almost nothing of substance. He talked about player development in broad, generic terms. He talked about the team needing improvement at every position. He talked about thinking carefully about decisions involving young players. He said everything except what a young quarterback needs to hear from his head coach. He never said, in plain and simple terms, that he believed in Shedeur Sanders. He never said, with the kind of conviction that moves a locker room and fires up a fan base, that this young man had what it took to be the quarterback of this franchise. He never gave Shedeur the public validation that every first-round pick deserves from the person leading his organization. And what makes this even striking is what was happening on the field at the same time. Because while Stefanski was busy crafting non-answers and dodging questions, Shedeur Sanders was actually going out there and playing well. The back half of that season told a story that no amount of coaching evasiveness could completely bury. Shedeur was winning games. He was flashing the kind of brilliance that made scouts and evaluators sit up straight in their chairs. He was showing exactly the kind of poise, precision, and competitive fire that people who believed in him coming out of Colorado had been promising was there. And yet, the head coach watched all of that and still could not bring himself to plant a flag in the ground and say publicly, clearly, and without qualification that Shedeur Sanders was his guy. Think about what that environment does to a young player.
Think about what it communicates, not just to Shedeur himself, but to every other player in that locker room watching how their head coach handles their starting quarterback. The message is corrosive. It creates doubt where there should be confidence. It creates distance where there should be unity. It tells the room that the coach himself is not fully invested in the direction this team is supposed to be heading, and it puts an unfair and unnecessary burden on a rookie quarterback who is already dealing with everything that comes with transitioning from college football to the most competitive professional sports league on the planet. The fact that Shedeur Sanders performed as well as he did under those circumstances is not just impressive, it's remarkable. It says something profound about who this young man is at his core, his mental toughness, his competitive resilience, his refusal to let an unsupportive environment become an excuse for poor performance. Most quarterbacks, even talented ones, would have cracked under that kind of pressure. Shedeur did not crack. He played, and he played well enough to make the football world take notice, with or without his head coach's endorsement. There is a specific moment that crystallized everything wrong with how Stefanski handled the Shedeur Sanders situation, and it came when reporters pushed hard and asked the head coach directly why he would simply put Shedeur in there to see if the young quarterback could spark an offense that was clearly struggling. It was a fair question. It was a reasonable question. It was the question that every Cleveland fan watching from home was screaming at their television screens. And Stefanski's response was to pivot. He deflected. He talked about the other quarterbacks. He buried the answer in so many qualifiers and conditional statements that by the time he was done speaking, nobody in that press room was any clearer on where Shedeur stood than when the question was first asked.
That kind of evasiveness from a head coach is not a neutral act. People treat it like it is just a personality quirk or a coaching style preference, but it is not neutral. When a head coach refuses to publicly back a player, refuses to speak about that player with confidence and enthusiasm, the silence itself becomes a statement. The locker room hears it, the front office hears it, the rest of the league hears it. Other teams, other coaches, other players, they are all paying attention to how a head coach talks about his quarterback. And when the answer to every Shedeur Sanders question was essentially nothing, that nothing spoke volumes. It created a narrative around Shedeur that was not entirely fair and not entirely earned. A narrative that said, even if nobody came out and stated it directly, that the Cleveland Browns were not truly sold on this kid, that the organization was hedging, that the head coach had doubts he was not willing to voice publicly, but was making absolutely clear through his body language, his word choices, and his conspicuous avoidance of direct answers. And once that narrative takes root, once it starts circulating through the league's information networks, it becomes harder and harder for a young quarterback to shake it, regardless of what he does on the field. But here is where the story takes its most important turn. Here is where everything shifts. Because Kevin Stefanski is no longer the head coach of the Cleveland Browns, and the man who replaced him is doing everything differently. Todd Monken became the head coach of the Cleveland Browns, and from the very first moment he stepped behind a microphone at the NFL Combine, it was obvious to anyone paying attention that the culture in Cleveland had undergone a fundamental transformation. Not a surface-level rebrand, not a carefully managed PR pivot designed to make the organization look good heading into a new season. A genuine, substantive, from-the-ground-up change in how the people leading this franchise think about and communicate their quarterback situation. When reporters came at Monken at the Combine with questions about Shedeur Sanders, and they came at him hard, they came at him with the kind of pointed, aggressive questioning that is designed to create controversy and get a head coach to either defend himself or throw his players under the bus. Monken did not flinch. He did not blink. He did not dance. He sat there, cool and composed, and he talked about Shedeur Sanders the way a head coach is supposed to talk about his quarterback, with honesty, with enthusiasm, with the kind of genuine, unperformed confidence in the young man that makes everyone listening feel like they are watching a real relationship being built, rather than a carefully managed media narrative being spun. He acknowledged the entire backstory up front. He acknowledged that it was widely reported Shedeur did not want to come to Cleveland when he was drafted.
He acknowledged the questions that came with that situation. He acknowledged the scrutiny and the drama that surrounded Shedeur's arrival in Cleveland and his rocky first season, and he addressed all of it without getting defensive, without deflecting, and without trying to pretend that any of it did not happen. He owned the reality of the situation and then immediately pivoted to the future, which is exactly what strong leaders do. They do not hide from complicated histories, they acknowledge them and then move forward with clarity and purpose. The contrast between watching Monken speak about Shedeur and watching Stefanski speak about Shedeur is so stark, so undeniable, that it almost feels like watching footage from two completely different organizations rather than the same franchise separated by a single offseason. Everything about the body language is different. Everything about the word choices is different. Everything about the energy in the room is different. When Stefanski talked about Shedeur, or more accurately, when Stefanski did everything in his power to avoid talking about Shedeur, the atmosphere felt tense, guarded, and uncomfortable. When Monken talks about Shedeur, the atmosphere feels energized, open, and genuinely optimistic. And that difference matters enormously, because the way a head coach talks about his quarterback in public is a direct window into the culture he is building behind closed doors. Now here is the moment that stopped people cold. Here is the story that had Browns fans rewinding clips, sharing screenshots, and flooding social media with reactions. Because when Todd Monken was talking about his relationship with Shedeur Sanders at the Combine, he told a story so specific, so personal, and so revealing that it painted a clearer picture of where this relationship stands than any amount of careful coaching speak ever could. Monken revealed that since taking the head coaching job in Cleveland, he has already spoken with Shedeur 3 separate times, 3 conversations, 3 phone calls or meetings before a single practice has been held, before a single snap has been taken, before the pads have even gone on. That alone tells you something important. That alone tells you that Shedeur Sanders is not a passive participant in whatever is being built in Cleveland. He is actively engaged. He is picking up the phone. He is initiating contact. He is doing the work of relationship building that the best quarterbacks in this league understand is just as important as the physical work they do on the practice field. But then Monken went further. He told the story about his birthday on February 5th. He said a package arrived unexpectedly, and his first assumption was that it had come from his wife. He opened it up, and inside was a porcelain horse head. Not from his wife, from Shedeur Sanders. The young quarterback, completely unprompted, had tracked down his new head coach's birthday and sent him a gift, and not just any generic gift, a specific, thoughtful, personality-driven gift that showed Shedeur had actually been paying attention to the kind of person Todd Monken is. Monken said he reached out to Shedeur to ask about the meaning behind the horse head, and Shedeur told him he simply really liked it and had gotten one for himself too. Monken laughed, telling the story, made the inevitable Godfather jokes with reporters about bloody horse heads in beds, and then said he placed it right in his office, positioned directly between all the Cleveland helmets, so Shedeur will see it the moment he walks in for his visit.
Now, some people will hear that story and think it is just a fun anecdote, a cute moment, a lighthearted detail in an otherwise serious football story. But that reading misses everything that actually matters about it, because the birthday gift is not just a birthday gift. The birthday gift is a signal. It is a declaration of intent from a young quarterback who understands that winning a starting job in the NFL is not purely about what happens between the white lines on a football field. It is about relationships. It is about trust. It is about making the people in your building feel like you are genuinely invested in them and in the thing you are building together. Shedeur Sanders sent that gift because he wanted Todd Monken to know, in a way that no press conference statement or Instagram post could communicate, that he is bought in, that he respects this man, that he wants to build something real with this head coach, that the fractured, uncomfortable dynamic of his rookie year is not the story he is interested in repeating. And the fact that Monken shared that story publicly, the fact that he talked about it with obvious warmth and genuine amusement, tells you that the feeling is entirely mutual. This is what a functional quarterback-head coach relationship looks like in the NFL.
This is what it looks like when a head coach and his quarterback are genuinely invested in each other, genuinely building something together, and genuinely excited about what they might be able to accomplish. It looks like 3 phone calls before training camp and a porcelain horse head sitting in the coach's office between the helmets, waiting for the day the quarterback walks through the door. While Monken was making headlines with his candid and enthusiastic comments about Shedeur, General Manager Andrew Berry was also speaking at the Combine, and the language he used is worth examining extremely carefully, because the way front office executives speak about players, especially young quarterbacks in uncertain situations, is loaded with meaning if you know how to read it. Berry came out and talked about Shedeur Sanders by name, specifically and directly, in a way that communicated genuine organizational belief rather than the carefully hedged, non-committal language you use when you are slowly distancing yourself from a player you were planning to move on from. He talked about the positive things Shedeur did as a rookie. He acknowledged the typical growing pains that come with being a first-year starter in the NFL, and he expressed real, tangible excitement about watching this young man grow and develop moving forward. Now, people who have been following the NFL long enough know that general managers are masters of corporate language. They are trained to say very little while appearing to say a great deal. They speak in carefully calibrated sentences designed to neither confirm nor deny, neither commit nor alienate. So when a general manager steps up in front of reporters and speaks about a young quarterback with the kind of specific, enthusiastic language that Berry used about Shedeur, that is not an accident. That is not a slip of the tongue. That is a deliberate signal about how this organization views its quarterback situation and where its priorities lie. Berry also confirmed that he and Monken have been spending significant time together evaluating all 3 quarterbacks currently in the building: Shedeur Sanders, Dillon Gabriel, and Deshaun Watson. He was honest enough to acknowledge that the veteran quarterback market, as well as the upcoming draft class, are both factors being considered as the organization shapes its roster for 2026. He admitted openly that nobody has a crystal ball. Nobody can say with absolute certainty right now exactly what the quarterback room is going to look like when the pads go on and the real evaluation begins. But the critical thing about how Berry is communicating is not the specifics of what he said, it is the spirit behind it. He is not running from the Shedeur Sanders conversation. He is not burying the young quarterback in qualifiers or treating him like a depth chart footnote. He is engaging with the situation openly and honestly, which is what an organization does when it genuinely believes a player is part of its future. The Browns brass appears to view this quarterback competition not as a problem to be managed, but as a genuine opportunity, a chance to see what they really have in Shedeur Sanders when he is placed in an environment that actually supports his development, rather than quietly undermining it. That shift alone, from managing perception to genuinely evaluating talent, is monumental, and it sets the stage for what could be one of the most important quarterback stories in the NFL over the next 12 months. There is a conversation that cannot be avoided in any honest discussion of the Cleveland Browns quarterback situation, and it is the conversation about Deshaun Watson. Not about who Watson was at the peak of his powers, not about the talent and the ability and the electric performances he put together in his best seasons in Houston, but about where Watson stands right now in 2026 as a competitor for the starting job in Cleveland. A Browns reporter at the Combine addressed this directly, and the argument made was so grounded in observable football reality that it is genuinely difficult to push back against, regardless of your feelings about either quarterback. In the last 5 years, Deshaun Watson has appeared in 19 games. 19! Take a moment and let that number sit with you. Not 19 games in one difficult season, not 19 games because of a single devastating injury that he is now recovering from. 19 games spread across 5 full years of professional football. That is a level of unavailability that goes well beyond bad luck or a rough stretch of health. That is a fundamental, sustained absence from competitive football that creates a specific and serious set of problems for any quarterback trying to return to starting-level play. because football is not a sport where you can step away for extended periods and then simply return to your previous level of performance through sheer willpower and muscle memory. The game is too fast. The mental processing required to operate an NFL offense at a high level is too complex and too specific. The timing relationships between a quarterback and his receivers, the feel for the pocket, the ability to process multiple defensive looks simultaneously and make the right decision in fractions of a second, none of that can be maintained through training room work and film study alone. It requires reps. Real reps against real competition at full speed with real consequences. And Watson has not been getting those reps consistently for the better part of half a decade.
That is not an opinion. That is not a narrative constructed by people who want to see Watson fail. That is the cold, documented, inescapable reality of what the last 5 years have looked like for this quarterback. Watson had his suspension, then he came back and could not stay healthy. And now, heading into 2026, he is looking at competing for a starting job against a young, healthy, motivated quarterback who has been playing football at a high level every single year of his career without interruption. The reporter made the point with surgical precision. When you are evaluating a quarterback competition, and on one side you have a player who has been in 19 games over 5 years, and on the other side you have a player who has been playing consistently game in and game out, season after season, you take the consistent player every single time. It does not matter how much talent the other guy had at his peak. Peak performance from 3 years ago does not help you win games in 2026. What helps you win games in 2026 is what you can do right now, today, when you strap on the pads and take the field. And this is not about dismissing Watson as a human being or as an athlete. When Watson was operating at his best, he was genuinely one of the most dynamic and dangerous quarterbacks in the entire league. There was a stretch where he looked like a generational talent at the position, the kind of player you build a franchise around for the next decade. But that version of Watson, as exciting and as real as it was, does not exist on the current Cleveland Browns roster. What exists on the current Cleveland Browns roster is a quarterback who has played 19 games in 5 years and is trying to come back from that level of extended absence against a young competitor who has been playing football with full consistency throughout that same period. The reporter was explicit. He would not completely write Watson off because you never fully discount that caliber of talent without seeing him compete. But the numbers, the logic, the football reality, and the pure competitive math all point clearly in the same direction. Shedeur Sanders enters this competition as the favorite, and not just slightly. When you account for all the relevant factors, the consistency of play, the age, the health, the momentum coming out of the back half of last season, the gap is significant. But the Deshaun Watson conversation is not just a football conversation, it is a financial conversation. And the financial dimension of this situation is one of the most important and most uncomfortable storylines in the entire NFL right now, not just in Cleveland. The Watson contract has become one of the most discussed, most dissected, and most cautionary contractual situations in recent professional football history. The numbers are staggering, the cap implications are severe, and the Cleveland Browns organization, which committed to that deal with every expectation that Watson would be the franchise quarterback who justified every dollar and every draft pick traded away to acquire him, is now staring down the reality that the player they bet the franchise on has been available for 19 games in 5 years. The impact of that contract on everything the Browns can and cannot do as an organization is not abstract, it is concrete and it is immediate. Every dollar committed to Watson is a dollar that cannot go toward the other pieces, the offensive linemen, the skill position weapons, the defensive playmakers that this team needs to compete in the AFC North. Every dollar tied up in a quarterback who cannot stay on the field is a dollar that is effectively removed from the rest of Todd Monken's ability to build a competitive roster.
This is the context in which Shedeur Sanders' development takes on an importance that goes far beyond just whether he can win a quarterback competition. If Shedeur develops into a legitimate starting caliber quarterback in this league, and the evidence from the back half of last season suggests he absolutely has the tools to do that, then the Cleveland Browns suddenly have something that most organizations would trade almost anything to have. They have a young, motivated, talented quarterback on a rookie contract, generating elite production at an affordable price, which is the single most valuable commodity in professional football. That financial reality is not separate from the football evaluation. It is central to it. When Todd Monken says he views this team as a retool rather than a rebuild, when he points to the back half of last season, looks at a team that almost beat the Bills at home, beat the Steelers, and went on the road and beat the Bengals, and says this roster is closer than people think, the math only works if the quarterback situation resolves in a cost-efficient way. You cannot retool a team that is carrying enormous cap weight at the quarterback position. You cannot be aggressive in free agency and build around your needs when the most expensive player on your roster is a question mark. But if Shedeur wins the job and performs, the entire financial equation changes. Resources get freed up, options get opened. The retool becomes genuinely possible rather than just aspirational. The reporter who highlighted Watson's 19 games made this point with particular force. Even if you are not a Shedeur fan, even if you never believed him and have never been on the bandwagon, from a cold, purely business-oriented perspective, from the perspective of someone who doesn't care about any individual player and only cares about building a winning football team, having a capable, healthy, young quarterback performing at a high level on a rookie contract is exactly what the Cleveland Browns need right now to have any realistic chance of digging out from under the Watson contract situation and building something sustainable. Shedeur Sanders is not just competing for a starting job, he is competing for the right to be the financial cornerstone around which an entirely new version of the Cleveland Browns gets constructed.
It would be irresponsible to have this conversation without acknowledging Dillon Gabriel, because Gabriel is in that quarterback room and he has earned every bit of the respect that Todd Monken showed him at the Combine. This is not a two-man story. There are 3 quarterbacks being evaluated, and the head coach made it explicitly clear that he is not going to walk in on day one and hand anyone a key to anything. Gabriel's track record is legitimately impressive. Moving through Central Florida, Oklahoma, and Oregon at an elite level across multiple programs in major conferences requires real adaptability, real football intelligence, and real physical talent. He was not just passing through these programs collecting roster spots. He was producing. He was winning. He was demonstrating exactly the kind of consistency and effectiveness that translates to NFL evaluators sitting up and paying attention. Monken was right to credit him specifically and to make clear that Gabriel will get every opportunity to compete for this starting job on equal footing. But here is the reality of where this situation actually stands, and no amount of fairness-driven framing changes it. The gravitational center of this quarterback conversation in Cleveland is Shedeur Sanders. It has been since the moment he was drafted. It continues to be now, through the offseason, through the Combine period, through the relationship building with Monken and the front office. The energy, the attention, the cultural conversation, the emotional investment of the fan base, the media focus, all of it orbits around Shedeur. Monken knows it, Barry knows it, the reporters know it, the league knows it. And crucially, Shedeur Sanders knows it. And rather than crumbling under the weight of that attention, rather than retreating from the spotlight or getting consumed by the pressure of being the center of the story, he appears to be thriving in it. He is picking up the phone and calling his new head coach. He is sending thoughtful birthday gifts. He is planning facility visits before the offseason program even begins. He is doing everything that a quarterback who understands the totality of what the job requires, not just the physical parts, but the leadership parts, the relationship parts, the culture-building parts, should be doing. That is not nothing.
In a league where plenty of physically gifted quarterbacks have stumbled and failed because they could not handle the mental and emotional dimensions of the position, watching a young player actively embrace those dimensions and attack them with the same intensity he brings to the film room and the practice field is one of the most encouraging signs an organization can see from its young quarterback. Gabriel is a legitimate competitor, and this competition will be real, but Shedeur Sanders is walking into it with wind at his back in ways that extend far beyond football ability alone. To truly understand why Shedeur Sanders is built for this moment, why the pressure of a high-stakes quarterback competition in a difficult NFL market is not going to break him, you have to understand the specific and genuinely extraordinary environment in which he developed as a football player and as a person. Shedeur Sanders did not grow up in a normal football program. He grew up playing for his father, Deshaun Sanders, one of the most famous, most polarizing, and most scrutinized figures in the history of American sports. First at Jackson State, a historically black university that does not typically generate the kind of national media coverage Deshaun immediately brought to it. Then, at Colorado, one of the most high-profile rebuilding stories in college football in recent memory, where Deshaun Sanders arrived with a full media circus in tow and immediately transformed a struggling program into one of the most watched and most talked about teams in the country. Playing in that environment means something specific. It means that from the time Shedeur Sanders was developing as a college quarterback, there were cameras everywhere, there were microphones everywhere, there was national media attention on every game, every practice, every decision. And alongside the attention came the questions, the constant, persistent, uncomfortable questions about nepotism, about whether Shedeur deserved his spot, about whether he was only on the field because his father was the coach, about whether his numbers reflected genuine NFL-caliber ability or simply the product of playing in a system designed to make him look good. Those questions follow a player. They create a specific kind of psychological pressure that most quarterbacks never have to deal with. Most quarterbacks get to develop in relative obscurity, away from the national spotlight, building their game and their confidence without having to simultaneously defend their legitimacy to a skeptical public. Shedeur had to do both at the same time. He had to play quarterback at a high level and also constantly prove over and over again that he deserved to be there at all. He navigated that. He did not just survive it, he thrived in it. He developed into a legitimate NFL prospect not despite the fishbowl environment, but arguably in some ways because of it. Because when you spend your formative years as a player dealing with that level of scrutiny and that level of doubt from the outside the program, you develop a psychological toughness that simply cannot be manufactured in a comfortable, low-pressure environment. You either crack under that weight or you come out the other side harder, more focused, and more prepared for whatever comes next. Then came the draft. The pre-draft process was its own particular kind of difficult for Shedeur. His stock fluctuated wildly. His character was questioned in ways that went well beyond standard NFL evaluation. Questions surfaced, some grounded in legitimate football scouting concerns, some that felt like something else entirely, and Shedeur had to sit through a process where his entire life was being examined under a microscope while teams and analysts and media personalities debated publicly whether he was worth the investment. And then he landed in Cleveland in a situation that was clearly not his first choice, and spent his rookie season dealing with a head coach who seemed determined to treat him like a problem to be managed rather than a talent to be developed.
At every step of this journey, Shedeur Sanders has encountered resistance. He has encountered doubt. He has encountered environments that were not designed to bring out the best in him. And at every step, he has responded by playing football, by competing, and by refusing to let the circumstances define the outcome. That is not a small thing. That is a defining characteristic of the quarterbacks who go on to have long, successful, impactful careers in this league. Todd Monken did not come to Cleveland to oversee a rebuild. He came to Cleveland to win, and the distinction between those two things is not semantic. It is not a marketing slogan designed to manage fan expectations for a rough few years ahead. It is a genuine philosophical position backed by a specific analysis of what he watched when he was evaluating this roster before taking the job.
When Monken looked at the back half of last season, he did not see a broken team. He did not see a roster that needed to be torn down to the studs and rebuilt from scratch over the next 3 to 5 years. He saw a team that nearly beat the Buffalo Bills at home. He saw a team that beat the Pittsburgh Steelers at home. He saw a team that went on the road and beat the Cincinnati Bengals. He looked at those results and said, essentially, that if those exact same games happen in the first 3 weeks of the 2026 season, this team is 2-1 and in position to compete for everything. That is not blind optimism. That is not a new coach trying to generate excitement in a market that desperately needs something to feel good about. That is the honest assessment of a veteran football mind who has looked carefully at the available evidence and concluded that this organization is closer than the outside world currently believes. A retool, a few positions here and there, get the right people in the right spots, build the right culture, and compete. But that vision, as compelling and as credible as it is, has a critical dependency at its center. Everything Monken is describing, the retool, the rapid competitiveness, the ability to win in the AFC North without going through a years-long rebuild, all of it depends on solving the quarterback situation in a way that is both effective and sustainable. It depends on having a young quarterback who can take the reins of this offense and run with them, who can operate at a high enough level to make the team competitive right now, without requiring the organization to commit massive financial resources that would undermine the ability to address the rest of the roster. Shedeur Sanders is that solution, if he develops the way his supporters believe he will. If Shedeur wins this competition and plays anything close to the way he played in the back half of last season, with the poise, the accuracy, and the competitive fire that made people stand up and take notice, then Monken's retool vision becomes not just a vision, but a realistic plan. Suddenly you have a quarterback who can compete in the AFC North against Lamar Jackson, Joe Burrow, and whoever Pittsburgh lines up at the position. Suddenly you have resources freed up that were previously locked into the most expensive question mark in the league. Suddenly, the entire calculus of this organization shifts from survival mode into genuine competition mode. The stakes of this quarterback competition, when you lay them out this clearly, go far beyond just who gets the starting nod in Week 1 of the 2026 season. They go to the heart of what the Cleveland Browns are going to be for the next 5 to 10 years. They go to the heart of whether Todd Monken gets the tools he needs to turn his retool vision into reality. And they go to the heart of whether one of the most resilient, most tested, and most psychologically prepared young quarterbacks in the game gets the opportunity he has spent his entire career earning. Step back and look at the full picture of what is happening in Cleveland right now, and it is genuinely one of the most fascinating organizational stories in the NFL. You have a young quarterback who spent his rookie season grinding through adversity that most players in his position never have to deal with, a head coach who would not say his name, a narrative that questioned everything about him, a fan base that was split between hope and skepticism, and who responded to all of it by going out and playing well enough to win games and generate real excitement about the future. You have a new head coach who stepped in and immediately changed the entire temperature of the conversation, who spoke about Shedeur with honesty and enthusiasm in front of national media, who shared a story about a birthday gift that told the world more about the relationship being built in Cleveland than any official statement ever could, who articulated a clear and credible vision for what this team can become and placed Shedeur Sanders right at the center of that vision without hesitation or qualification. You have a general manager who is speaking the language of genuine organizational belief rather than the carefully hedged corporate speak of a front office that is quietly planning to move on. You have a reporter community that has been paying close attention and is beginning to articulate with increasing confidence that the football math points clearly in Shedeur's direction when you account for all the relevant factors. And you have Shedeur Sanders himself, a young man who has been tested at every turn, who has been doubted at every stage, who has played through every difficult circumstance that has been placed in front of him, who now is entering a quarterback competition with a head coach who believes in him, a front office that is talking about him the right way, and a clear opportunity to seize the starting job and prove every skeptic wrong.
The contrast between where Shedeur was 12 months ago and where he is today is almost difficult to believe. 12 months ago, he was in a building where his own head coach seemed reluctant to speak his name. Today, he has a head coach who told a national media audience about the birthday gift Shedeur sent him, who placed it in his office between the helmets, who is clearly and genuinely invested in watching this young man succeed. 12 months ago, the narrative around Shedeur in Cleveland felt uncertain, uncomfortable, and quietly negative. Today, the narrative feels energized, open, and genuinely optimistic in a way that has the potential to be the foundation of something real and lasting. The NFL Combine did not just reveal what the Cleveland Browns think about their quarterback situation. It revealed what happens when an organization actually commits to doing right by a young player, when the people in charge decide that developing talent and building genuine relationships matters more than managing optics and protecting predetermined outcomes. And it revealed more clearly than anything Shedeur has said or done publicly that this young man is ready for this moment, ready for the competition, ready for the spotlight, ready for the opportunity to show the entire football world what he is truly capable of when he is finally playing in an environment built to help him succeed. The stage is set, the cast is in place, and when those pads go on this spring and the quarterback competition in Cleveland begins in earnest, the entire football world is going to be watching. Not because it is just another roster battle, but because it is the culmination of one of the most dramatic, most human, and most genuinely compelling quarterback stories the NFL has produced in years. A young man who was tested, doubted, undermined, and overlooked. A new coach who walked in and immediately saw what the old one could not or would not see. And an organization that finally appears to understand that the most important thing you can do for a talented young quarterback is simply believe in him, out loud, in public, without apology, and without reservation. That is what Cleveland is doing now, and if it works, when it works, nobody in the NFL is going to be surprised, because the signs have been there all along for anyone paying close enough attention to see them.